Good morning. It's great to be here. I was just thinking, I've had a couple of days of looking around Istanbul, and it's amazing. I mean, just those layers of history here is just filled with stories. And of course, that's what we're here to talk about today. I'm going to take you through a couple of these different story patterns. So I like this idea that, there's different very basic patterns that you can use and reuse as a way of telling stories. And we like to teach these 4 patterns plus an underlying foundation of the ability to spot stories. So let me just take you quickly through these patterns. We're not going to be able to go through all of them today, but I'll show you a couple. The first one is a connection story. So a connection story is when you meet people for the first time, a seller needs to be able to make a very quick connection and build rapport. And one of the best ways to do that is to share a story, right? I had to go and meet a CEO of a company called Bayer. They're a pharmaceutical company. And you do what you normally do. I went onto LinkedIn and I had a look at the CEO's profile. And she had just arrived in Australia and she was from the USA. And I noticed that she was originally from South Carolina, right? Now, it turns out I was born in South Carolina, right? I know, I've got an Australian accent, but, way back when, I was born in South Carolina. And so when I walked in the door, I said, "Oh, I hear you're from South Carolina. I was born there." And she said, "How did you end up here in Australia?" And what did I do? I told a story. Next thing you know, we were like connected, like we were old buddies that, had known each other for years. And, this is this idea of finding a connection story. And we'll talk a little bit about, what are some of the key characteristics of good connection stories, okay? Now, it turns out that the worst strategy you can take to change someone's mind is to argue with them, to give them a better argument. And this is what we do all the time in organisations. We think, okay, they're thinking this way, I need to get them thinking this way, I'm going to give them a clever argument that has all this data and facts and figures. Well, it turns out the more you do that, the more they dig their heels in. I think we all have the confirmation bias, right? So the confirmation bias says that when someone provides an argument and we disagree with that argument, we will find everything in what they say to make it sound like the thing you want to support, right? They won't shift. But it turns out that if you can share a story or two that gives them a different perspective, they won't flip straight away. It's not like they'll just hear your story and all of a sudden their perspective changes, but they listen to you. They can hear it. And it's because there's a difference in how we communicate when you share a story versus opinion, okay? So think about it. If someone gives you an opinion, they're pushing the opinion at you. What do we do in return when someone pushes something at you? You tend to push back, right? You tend to, start to fight with them. However, when someone shares a story, the audience just pulls the story in. They go, "Really? Did that happen? Oh, that's really interesting. What happens next?" So they might be receiving the exact same information, but because it's a pull strategy, they get to hear things that they don't hear when it's a push strategy. See the difference? So what we're trying to do with the influence story is to make sure you're getting the story out before you get your opinion out. And Cheryl's turned to me and said that she had something interesting happen to her just recently. She had joined a big utility company, thousands of people across the US in this particular organisation. She's in the comms field. So she thought, okay, the first thing I need to do is get out into the field and sort of see what it's like out there. And so she arrives at the depot. She's about to take a ride in one of the sort of utility trucks. And so she jumps in the truck And her driver, a guy called Jack, looks at her and sort of says, the first thing he says is, are you married, Cheryl? And she's sort of a little bit taken aback by this, and she said, yeah, I am actually. He says, and Jack says, so what is the colour of your husband's eyes? The other ones which are really effective are the ones which are visual, right? The ones you can see happening. So, you know, in my story just then about the story about the scam, you could probably imagine that person actually at the IDM, and imagine the branch manager coming over and giving him a hand. If it's visual and it has a point, it will actually have an impact. At that point, the leader just pauses and says, so what's our dolphin kick, right? We can't get complacent. What do we do to keep ahead? These guys were the number one in their particular category, and they just didn't want it. This leader didn't want them to slide back, didn't want them to have that same experience that Phelps did in the London Olympics. So that was the story I heard, and I hope you can use it. And I think it's a great one for, just motivating an audience, getting them excited about the fact that they can keep ahead or move ahead. They can either tell it from the perspective of, Phelps who was ahead, or maybe you're the Lockie, right? Maybe your company is more of a Lockie who has to come up with a new dolphin kick and get ahead of the guy who's leading at the moment.